Wright, Chief Executive of Sunbelt Rentals UK, Brian Stead, Director of Compliance and Project Management Office at Nationwide Platforms, and Andy Burrows, UK Operations Manager of Lynch Plant Hire. The webinar and questions will be moderated by Brian Jones, President of CPA. As an attendee, you will be able to use the Q&A facility on Zoom to put forward questions. We'll try to cover these if time allows. There are, of course, some issues that we won't be able to discuss, such as sensitive commercial issues, such as actual rental rates. So let me introduce the panelists. Andy Wright is Chief Executive of Sunbelt Rentals UK, formerly known as A-Plant. Andy joined Sunbelt from Speedy Hire and previously worked at Lavender Group, heading up Lavender's UK operations before moving to the Middle East with the company. Brian Stead is Director of Compliance and PMO at Nationwide Platforms. This division represents about 50% of Loxam Group's revenues following major expansion internationally. And Andy Burrows is UK Operations Manager of Lynch Plant Hire. Lynch Plant Hire supplies self-drive and operated plant hire to a variety of sectors within the construction industry. As I mentioned before, the questions will be moderated by CPA President Brian Jones, who's been President of CPA for 3 or more years now and a long-standing council member at CPA. Thank you to all of the participants, all of the panelists, for coming along today and sharing your thoughts and knowledge of the plant hire industry. So now I will hand over to Brian to lead the webinar itself. Thank you. Brian.
Thanks, Kevin, and welcome to everybody, and good to see you all looking safe and well, and a big thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules today. We know how busy you are, certainly in the present climate. We've just got a number of questions that we'd like to sort of run by in a discussion type mode, and we can go around the panel. We've got 60 minutes. As Kevin has just said, if we've got time at the end, we will take a couple of questions and they can be posed back to you if that's okay with you guys. Firstly, if I could just kick off and really, because this is a recovery mode, road to recovery from COVID, but now the lockdown's easing, if I could just ask how comfortable you all are really in the current situation. And that's regarding both your employees, which are very, very important to us all, and both to your company. If I can kick off with you, Andrew, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Yeah, I'm known as Andrew for the purposes of this webinar, so we've got a couple of Andys on the call. Yeah, thanks for inviting me to participate in this event. It's vital to the industry, I think, that we pull together to ensure that we get through this situation actually in the best shape that we can, because it is a challenging time. It's unprecedented, which is a word that's very much overused at the moment, but it's overused because it's the right word. It's an unprecedented situation. So, I mean, in answer to your question, then I'm reasonably comfortable with where we are at the moment. You know, right from the start, we decided that, you know, we wanted to place obviously the safety of our employees first. That was paramount. The government announced obviously their job retention scheme, which subsequently we didn't. We decided we weren't going to access anyway. But we decided that there were certain locations that we, you know, couldn't work safely from, and so we closed those. Relatively small number of locations, and in the ones that we kept open, we introduced a rotational structure to ensure that social distancing could be observed. So the safety was absolutely paramount. I think the other thing that, you know, clearly was an issue right at the start was that, you know, the kind of concerns that employees would have about the financial situation, particularly as the you know, the government retention scheme was kind of an 80% of salary type of situation. So we wanted to act really quickly to allay any fears from our employees. So we reassured them that, you know, we would be here for them and that we'd be able to support them around, you know, there was numerous situations, wasn't there? You know, there were situations around, well, what happens if you display symptoms and you have to go and self-isolate? What happens if you're a vulnerable person and you've got a high degree of risk to, you know, to the virus? What happens if you've got kids and you can't get them into schools and you've got a child mind? You know, what does that mean and how does that affect me from a financial perspective? So we tried to allay all of that, and we committed from the start that we would pay all our employees 100% of their basic salaries, and we've done that throughout. And even though we didn't access the job retention scheme, because in the end, we decided we didn't need to, and we decided that the scheme was for businesses that perhaps were not as fortunate to be in where we were from a cash perspective, and therefore the scheme was all about making sure that as many people as possible stayed employed rather than were made redundant at the start of the process. We decided that we didn't want to access the scheme. But even though we did that, we still paid our employees 100% of their basic salaries, whether they were in work or they weren't in work, as part of that process. So I think from our employees' perspective, I'm very comfortable that we've done the right thing by them, and I think they're comfortable in terms of the way that we've handled the situation. I mean, I think from a company perspective, then we're doing okay. I mean, after the initial lockdown, clearly revenues were affected for us all, and we've just posted our recent trading results for last year, and revenues were quite seriously affected through the back end of March and April, and that had a knock on in terms of our full year performance, as you would expect. But we've recovered well during May, and we're satisfied that we're trading better than any of the scenarios that we envisaged immediately after lockdown. So, so we modelled a number of situations from a relatively small drop to sort of a kind of Armageddon situation of what that might look like, and we've managed to recover reasonably well through that process. We've also been fortunate, I suppose, in being able to support the government in terms of building these drive-through testing sites, which has been helpful to us in terms of financial situation. But it's also helpful in terms of the sense of pride that it brings to our business in terms of being able to help the UK at this particular time of need. So so all of that has been helpful. So we're a critical service provider. We had two objectives. We wanted to ensure that our people were well looked after, and I think we've achieved that. And we wanted to be here for our customers over this difficult time. And I'm pretty pleased and definitely very proud to be able to say that we've been able to achieve that. I feel.
Brilliant. No, that's excellent. What about you, Brian?
Okay, well, a couple of first observations. Congratulations to Andy in the way his company has executed its actions throughout. The second point I would make is this is probably the first time I've used the word comfortable in respect of this pandemic, but I understand where you're coming from, Brian. Essentially, whether you worked or didn't work, it has definitely affected your daily routine, your daily activities. And whilst those who did go on furlough, and we did access the job retention scheme, if you were on furlough, it soon wore off, 1 week, 2 weeks, and then you wanted to get back. So what we've done, and probably like many companies, is we've really gone to town on our welfare and, if you like, happiness to some extent, side of looking after the staff both on furlough and not on furlough. The welfare support has been a major aspect of what we've done in terms of our planning. We were fortunate, there's no doubt about it, as Nationwide Platforms, we were fortunate in being part of the Loxham Group with other businesses operated in Europe who perhaps were hit slightly earlier than we were. So we were able to set up appropriate working structures to reflect on that. And one of the early learnings was definitely look after your staff, not just from a safety point of view. Absolutely, I'm with Andy, that is number one. I'll leave the accountants to say number two is managing cash, but I know it is, but safety is absolutely number one. But behind that, we needed to look after welfare. The people who were continuing to work were at the sharp end, very much had concerns because they were going into the unknown, and the people who were at home had concerns. And as we've come through it, we've managed that throughout with a formal weekly communication as well as interim communications to every employee in or out of the workplace. So we are coming out of what I hope is the worst case now. We have seen a significant return to work. Like Andy, we did close some of our sites where we felt it was unsafe to operate. We're also, being in a specialist, we can possibly be a little bit further away from the customer due to the size of the order, size of the delivery. And that enabled us to go on the prudent conservative side of whether a depot should stay open or close. And then with the rotation of staff in place, I think we, as an organisation, have done a very, very good job in keeping staff, shall we say, comfortable.
Okay, no, and that's excellent. It's good news, and I think the whole industry would welcome all of that, Brian. I think that's excellent. What about you, Andy?
Well, what I can say is, first and foremost, thank you for inviting me on such a board of people that I'm probably very comfortable or delighted to be in the company of the people that are certainly sitting here today. When this happened, I done a webinar, a release yesterday. Nobody was expecting or knowing what to do when it came to the pandemic. We were all, we had a business continuity plan that actually we just had to rip up and start again because it just didn't cover what we needed. So we spent a volume of time preparing that. We then spent a volume of time looking at our people and how we could safely secure our people within our offices. We had to then think about, because we're an operated plant hire company, we have different issues relating to our operators out on site and how we keep them safe and how we ensure that they're kept safe on site. So we've done a lot of communicating with our guys on site. We also kept communicating with our foreman operators that are on site, because those guys were trained in mental health awareness training, first aiders, to make sure they could look after our people. So we're quite fortunate in the fact that we've done that last year. So we're in a good place to make sure that our people had a voice, and we've encouraged all our guys on site to speak to us if they've got issues that they needed to raise relating to how sites were working. So we had eyes and ears on site, if you like. And I wanted them to feel, to tag a word that you used in your question, comfortable in voicing up. And that was really important to us. We continue to be proactive with lone workers out in the field and those at home. There was also those people at home, like you, Brian. We did use the government furlough scheme because we felt it was appropriate to. It was about us trying to make sure that we were being responsible. I wouldn't say we was comfortable. I think that makes us a little bit complacent. We ran around our offices putting automatic sanitizers in place. We had cleaners coming in every day doing a round robin around desks, cleaning people's desks 3 or 4 times a day before we used the furlough agreement and before we sent people home working. We've now put loads of one-way systems in place, 2-meter marking sections, a one-way system for our offices. So we've done an awful lot, like you guys have, to make sure that our people are safe, because after all, it's the people that are going to bring us through this. And it's been a tough period, not just for those people that are on the furlough that we were very conscious of keeping in touch with, but also those people that were sitting at home working, because that is quite a tough place to be, especially when the wife's breathing down your neck. So it was, you know, we're either going to have a baby boom or we're going to have a big divorce rate. But what we want to do is make sure that those people are fine and ready to come back.
Yeah, it could be both actually, and Andy, if you take it that way. Just building on that then, and I'm staying with you in a reverse sort of way, because I think it's more for your type of company, if I may say, in the earth moving industry. What challenges have the operators, I was going to ask as an additional question here, what challenges have they endured? What support, what procedures have you actually put in place for them with your operators out on site?
Well, the first thing we did with our operators is communicated an awful lot. And because we do have a variety of foremen, fitters, foreman operators, sorry, that go around, they look after our operators anyway. We had that in place previously. So it really did make it easier for us in respect of we could instruct those guys, right, you need to look after these guys more, you need to give them a voice, we need to make sure that all their machines, for example, are sanitized before they leave the building. We make sure that every machine is not just cleaned, because we normally do that, but also sanitized so that they feel safe and comfortable. All our lorry drivers had the same, so they had sanitizer wipes to be able to wipe their lorries, but also wipe the machine down after they've got out of it. and then just gave them a voice to make sure that they could talk to us with any need that they had. We did have some operators, we did have challenges. So for example, one particular site down in Somerset, we had to remove quite a few operators purely because it wasn't safe to leave them there. To be fair, the site made that decision. So, you know, we've done a variety of things, including taking instruction from our customers as well.
Yeah, oh, great. Oh, that's great. What about, can we come back to you then, Brian, now? And what sort of problems have you encountered?
Yeah, well, under operators, I'd throw three categories. Operators of the equipment, the machines, which quite often for us is truck mounts or track booms. I'd throw in engineers, and I would throw in drivers. To me, these are all our frontline guys who were at risk. Taking the operators first, and these are the guys who go up in the powered access machines, often with a customer alongside them. 2 metre distancing is not possible in a 1.8 metre basket because it is not acceptable to hang on the outside, and we were asked if we could mount platforms on the outside of the basket. Right. I'll put that down to innovation rather than stupidity, but the answer is always no. And we looked at that, and like so many in powered access now, we put in separation screens. I guess you would call it a 1 metre plus rule if you're looking at what's been announced this week, but where it was there and essential work, as it was for some government bodies during this pandemic, we put them out with that separation screen. We documented COVID operational rules on site, and importantly, we give the operator, engineer, or the driver the final say in their own safety. If they were not comfortable, we would always defend their decision. And it was important because so many of these guys want to get out there and get the job done, working for the company, working for the passion. And they were likely to put themselves at risk in order to get it done. So we really had to go to town on, now this is serious. Let's talk about your family. Let's talk about other people in the UK who may be infected. Your decision matters, and we will back you. So the operators, yeah, I guess we took a big slice backwards in terms of the operated work, because if it wasn't essential, then it wouldn't be done, it would be deferred. With the engineers, a little bit more difficult because a number of sites did continue working and have continued working throughout, but they did not have day one procedures in place. They understood the 2 metre rule, but it took a number of iterations from the appropriate bodies to get the rulings right and to track the ever-changing situation. So we were constantly briefing those. Fortunately, the use of this type of technology is great for the daily briefings to make sure they're right. And again, if it didn't need doing, don't do it. If the site was closed, don't try and get on to do what's called a Lolo in our case, because the machine's not going to be used, so it's not essential. If the work was essential, get on there, make sure you've got the right type of equipment, not just the PPE, but as mentioned, the sanitizing equipment, and do what's necessary there. Don't ask the customer to sign for the work done, because that's obviously not possible within 2 meters. And that translated through to the driver as well. Every machine went out, stamped COVID ready, but it was only COVID ready until he took it off the lorry, and then he had to go through the process again. There are a number of videos up on our website of how we prepare a machine, and those apply before the machine goes out and after it's taken off the vehicle, because you've essentially broken the COVID by loading it and unloading it. So lots of detailed work there for 3 categories of guys. The 4th category, we simply stopped it. We could not envisage a safe environment in the early stages, and that was customer training, which in our case is mostly IPATH training, the working at height regulations. We just closed that down, all of our training centres, because that enabled us to minimise the number of persons coming to our depots. Because the nature of our business is we don't have a collect business. So in theory, we can eliminate persons coming to the depot by managing maintenance contractors, by managing customer training, so we could protect our depots. So a whole raft of every area, every what I might call a touch point in the old terminology, had to be reviewed, processes changed and new processes added. But it has worked. It did make us, under the old measure, less efficient because of the additional tasks, but it's also true that there was less demand, so we weren't swamped.
That's brilliant and really good to know. Andy?
Yeah, Brian, thanks. I mean, we're obviously a little bit different to the guys in the sense we don't have too much in the way of operated equipment, but we do have some situations that are akin to that, so I'll come on to that. But you know, all of our 200 or so locations are up and running now, and have been for a few weeks. So we've got we've done that obviously in a safe way, and we've done that through localized risk assessments done at every location. So we've taken a view of every single location, and we've decided, you know, how we can maintain a 2 metre safe working distance to allow them to begin to operate. And then we've implemented various things that would support that. So whether that be, you know, every employee got numerous sort of face masks. Every location's got temperature measurement guns in place now, so nobody with a temperature will come into any of our locations. Obviously, customers were banned from our locations from day one. Anyway, you know, we don't have a huge collection business, but the bit that we do, we basically said you now can't come and do that. So that was something that was positive and supportive of that approach towards safety. As I said, we initially put in rotational systems, and now in some locations where we perhaps, you know, are concerned about social distancing, we've now got shift systems so we've only got you know, a smaller number of people in a location at any particular point in time. So all of that has worked really well, and means that we're back at work, and you know, we can say that's worked very effectively. We do have certain businesses though where we have two-man teams that go out, so we've had to be pretty strict about that. And so, you know, if you take our traffic management business, then those guys often go out in twos. If you take our hoist business, when they go out to erect hoists, that's a two-man activity. So again, they would travel usually together in a vehicle. So we had to stop that, and we had to with two vehicles going to site constantly, which clearly you know, adds to the cost. But the safety is the most important piece of that. So all of that was good. I mean, I think one of the big challenges was right at the beginning of the lockdown was the government guidance was literally changing every day, at least once a day, maybe twice a day. And so myself and the rest of the exec team were meeting sort of morning and night every day, and we have been doing for the whole process up to very recently, to try to reinvent the wheel almost every day as advice changed, which counteracted what you'd done the day before in reality. So that was a pretty intensive period of time where we were having to think on our feet and work out how we could continue to support the business whilst following government advice. But that was a piece of work that was well worth doing. I mean, interestingly, the final thing really I just want to say was, you know, during the NHS installations, which were happening right at the point of lockdown, you know, in that first week or two, we started that, and we had sites from Inverness to Plymouth, and we had people that were travelling the country, and there was no, you know, the hotels were closed. So, you know, it became a very difficult process. Luckily, as critical workers, we were allowed to access some hotels. But, you know, the guys will tell you that being the only person in a Premier Inn without any facilities, you know, open, it was a pretty surreal experience for them. So, but I just want to say a big thank you to the whole team who did that, and the kind of sacrifices that they made along the way.
Yeah. No, that sounds great as well. I was tempted, but I won't go because we've got quite a bit to get through. But I'm sure that when you talk about governments changing tack on a daily basis, I can tell you a lot of people have told me, obviously, we've got the dissolved governments. And when I'm sat here in Wales, you know, I can imagine your trucks all pulling into Chester or Hereford and saying, no, you can't go no further because we've stopped you coming in here. So it's quite a very, very difficult logistical issue that a lot of people have asked me about on that one. Okay, that's brilliant on there. If we could move on, and I think the good thing about all of that is that certainly your companies have done everything that you can. It's really, really encouraging to know how much the employees have been looked after, etc., etc. If we could move it just slightly on now, and I'll stay with you, Andy, if I could, from a rental company, and certainly through the massive change that you've taken through Sunbelt, which has just gone on recently. How do you see? What's your point of view on the speed of recovery? Taking into construction, in the construction industry, are reporting yesterday that they're 35% down on this time last year. How do you see the recovery actually now taking place?
Well, I think this is a difficult one, if I'm honest. I think it's difficult for a number of reasons. I think firstly, it depends which part of the sector you're working in. So I think infrastructure looks like it'll be, well, better. Well, I won't say okay, but better, because it's going to have a lot of government support there, helping to fill any of the gaps with its HS2 or Highways England or whatever. That's going to be, you know, there's some significant plans to spend money there, which I think will be really helpful for some of the people within the industry. So I hope that'll fill any gaps from the other segments. But if you're involved in projects in aviation, retail, hospitality, then you're going to be under pressure right now, aren't you? People are not going to be spending money speculatively in those areas right now. Office construction, when people have been remote working, and probably people I talk about, it's worked pretty well. Are they going to be building large offices in the centre of London? Is that going to be the case? We don't really know, do we? So I think there's some issues and some concerns around the long-term areas around aviation, retail, hospitality, office construction, etc. I mean, the government are obviously trying to help, but anything that's termed speculative may well be cancelled or be best postponed. I think that's one of the concerns I have. And like anything in a kind of economic situation, confidence is always the critical word here, and confidence in making an investment decision is what's key. And confidence is in pretty short supply at the moment. So I don't want to be the bringer of doom and gloom here, but I think it's really important we have to be realistic about where we are as a sector within a broader economy. I mean, if you speak to economists, they'll tell you that they expect the end of 2022 or the beginning of 2023 to be when we get back to 2019 output levels from a construction perspective. So initially, when the crisis happened, when the virus happened, people were predicting a V-shaped recovery. So it was going to be a very sharp correction and then a very fast recovery. I don't think that's going to be the case. I mean, from what I can see, that's definitely not going to be the case. Others have said it may look more like a W. So particularly if there's a second wave in the winter, and there are some, there's lots and lots of noise starting to come out now in terms of the sort of government communications around, second wave, sort of hotspots for the virus. And that could be a distinct possibility, and that could be very, very damaging if that happens. But, having said that, given the government's additional preparedness now, they've now got more and more hospital capacity, more and more ICU capacity, more and more ventilators. They've got the testing capacity, which we've obviously been involved in. And if they get the test and trace system working properly, there's an opportunity there that if there is a second wave, they can squash it at its source, and it won't be as bad or as damaging as it was previously, and therefore we may not end up in a lockdown situation again if that were to happen. So I feel it's going to be a slower recovery. It's not going to be a V. It's going to look more like a tick. So a very sharp sort of correction, and then a slow recovery over time as people get back to work. And I think the issue is maybe not so much just now. It's also later, isn't it? Because there are projects that are up and running now, and we are working on completing those projects. But if we can't get confidence back in terms of future investment, then there won't be other projects to replace the ones that are finishing. And that's the thing that concerns me above anything. And that really is about getting the country back to operating normally, or as normal as new normal might be. And we need people working, and we need people, spending in the shops, and we need the thing to go back to as close to normal as it possibly can be. And if we don't find a virus, and who's to say whether we will or we won't? But I would think the chances are not great, given the fact there's no other coronavirus they've ever found a vaccine for in the past. So we're going to have to learn to live with it for a while, at least until we get this so-called herd immunity. We're going to have to learn to live and work with it. And that's really, really important, because if we can't get people back to work, I think that the length and the severity of this downturn is going to be extended and exaggerated. So that's my view on it. I think it's going to be a slow recovery, but there's things we can do to mitigate that.
Yeah, and so rather than just move on to both Andy and Brian, because my next question actually, which is really tied in with what you're saying, and give the other guys a chance to maybe put the two together as well, is I was going to ask you about capital expenditure. And obviously all companies such as yourselves has a plan in place, everything is there. Can you see that now then, and everything you've just explained, how capital expenditure is going to be, especially for your own companies, is that going to be affected? And do you think there'll be a change in emphasis on capital expenditure going forward?
Yeah, so I mean, as we all know, cash is king, and never more so than now. So when the crisis, the virus hit, our response was to conserve cash. And I'm sure most businesses, including the ones that are on this event today, we're looking to conserve cash. And that's both in terms of capital expenditure, but also in terms of discretionary spend, such as hiring new people. And all of that, we just basically locked it down and said, right, we're not going to do anything, because we need to understand what the cash position is going to look like. I mean, fortunately, we're pretty well invested as a group, and we run a relatively young fleet of equipment, so it allows us to flex investment, without too much pain. So that's one of the things, I suppose, benefits we've got. But you've got to also try and take a longer term view at the same time. So where it makes sense, we're spending capital in order to meet specific objectives and/or customer requirements. We're also in the process of rebranding, as you've said earlier, Brian, and that does take some money to do that. And initially we basically stopped that process. We paused it and took stock of how our trading was starting to recover, and we've restarted that now, albeit at a slower pace in certain areas. But we have strong demand in certain products, and we will continue to support that. But it's fair to say that we're looking closely at the strength of recovery based on the comments that I just made, and how sustainable that recovery is. So even if we see reasonable performance now, will there be a second wave of a downturn in terms of construction output later as projects end and new ones don't start? So I think it's a difficult time for everyone, and I imagine most people are adopting a prudent approach, a kind of wait and see. And I think, but just to reiterate, as soon as the country gets fully back to work, all right, and absolutely safely, the sooner the economy will improve, and the sooner the confidence levels in people who invest in new construction projects will rise, and the new projects will happen. So I don't think it's rocket science, but it is a difficult time, and obviously the confidence levels of the workforce are quite low because of what they've seen on the news. They've seen all the deaths, and they've seen the kind of the illness that's been created by the virus. So it's such a delicate balance of achieving all of that, but we've really got to do everything we can to make sure that happens, in my view.
Brilliant. What about you, Brian? I know there's quite a lot there. There's sort of two questions there. Can you give us a...
Yeah, I'll try and unpick that. I think Andy started by mentioning the sectors that he felt was hit in terms of aviation, retail, hospitality, and I think he said office as well. I would concur with all of those. Absolutely, we saw an impact in those areas. I would add from our side as well two others, which Andy didn't mention, but definitely it does. Events and film and media. Film and media stopped, events stopped. And if that is a percentage of your work, and you can imagine with working at height for film and media with the overhead shots, then that's quite significant for us. That all stopped. So we saw a number of sectors stop. We obviously saw the reduction in the work on the you mentioned 35% reference yesterday. That might be what the sites are down. I don't want to say too much, but fortunately we are slightly ahead of that curve in terms of the recovery. Will it be a V? No, it won't be a V. Andy used the word tick. I think he's absolutely right. It will be a slow. and it will get nowhere near 2019 levels by the end of this year, in our opinion. And end of 21, start of 22, again, as referenced by Andy, is probably where the common consensus is, but could be thrown off track with a second wave or even localized activity. You know, it's if there's some localized growth that causes shutdowns, for example, in London, that will have a much bigger impact for us than it will if it's on the Isle of Man. So effectively, yeah, a number of areas there where it's gone negative. On the positive, we've seen significant upturn in work for what I would call super cubes, the big distribution warehouses. By way of just mentioning a couple, not customers, but just to put it in context, Amazon and DHL, that sort of organization have seen a growth in demand through COVID, and they want space everywhere they can land their, get their hands on at the moment. So that has been a development. So there are some positives, unfortunately not enough to offset the negatives, so we are down. Moving on to capital expenditure, our capital expenditure plan typically is a 3-year cycle, and we face long lead times on our equipment. So it's, you know, we're not talking weeks, we're talking months, and at the extreme, we could be talking a year plus for a piece of equipment. So we do work on long cycles. 2020 was pretty much already decided and executed. There is, by the time that the COVID started hitting in the likes of Italy, France and elsewhere, which was our early warning system with our internal intelligence, a lot of the 2020 orders were committed, and we stand by our commitments. There was reduction where there was an opportunity to do so. In terms of the disposals, however, that will continue because we acquired a company, UK Platforms, last year, and we did a very detailed, in-depth study on the age of the equipment that we obtained, and there was a number of exit plans put in place. So if you measure it in the round, it will probably not be a net growth in fleet this year from our organisation, and we're just about to start looking at 2021. We would probably err more on the side of being conservative rather than do any counter-cyclical strategy to go and buy the market or anything like that. So it's difficult. We would be spending less on capital in the near term before recovering it back.
Okay, yeah, excellent. Andy Burrows? Have we gone? Has the sound gone?
Brian, it looks like Andy has lost signal for the moment.
Oh, he has. Okay, all right then. Okay, so, all right, well, maybe Andy could come back to us. If Andy comes back, we can...
Up in the most, I think housing... Sorry?
Oh, you're there, Andy, are you?
Can you...
No, we're having problems. We're having problems, Andy. Oh, you might be back. You're back now.
Okay, so what I was going to say is obviously I'd echo what Andy and Brian said about the sectors that have been hit. I also would say that the housing...
Yeah, we've definitely got a problem with Andy's signal there. Probably it's the bandwidth or something down there. So maybe our tech guys at the back end can sort that one out for us. In the meantime, I'm sure the other Andy Wright and Brian can hear me okay. Is that okay?
Yeah, I'm good.
If we move on then, because time's clacking on with us as well. And it's probably going on from where you were saying there, Brian, about earlier on when you were talking about training, IPAF and stuff like that. One of the questions, now we're getting back to, shall we call it now the new normal, as if this new term seems to be becoming the new normal. How do you see in the workplace you know, digitalization, information technology, telematics, and you mentioned IPAF and training. And is this all going to be done through all of this? How do you see that in nationwide, Brian?
Well, let me start with IPAF. I mean, one of my side jobs is I've been the chairman of the UK Country Council for the last 5 years for IPAF. So I do get to see information in terms of the trends. For IPAF, it stopped its training offer initially. It had to look at what to do for what's called PAL cards. I've lost the screen, but I'll carry on talking.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, it might be my end, but I'll keep going. We stopped it, but extended the PAL cards so that people who had got their 5-year card expired, they could continue using it for a short period of time. And we put in place, because the training side is in 2 parts. Firstly, a theory, second part, a practical, a bit like your driving test, if we can remember that far back. We allowed the theory to be done online. That's been available for a number of years, but the uptake has been very, very low. That has grown about 20-fold during the pandemic of people taking the theory online. And we'd like, as IPAF, not as Nationwide, we'd like that to continue because we do feel it's a good way of making individuals more efficient, including ourselves, but certainly the customer. So from a training point of view, it stopped, then it started with the online. We're now back into the practical side of it with all the appropriate distancing rules, the cleaning of machines, and pre-registration of the do's and don'ts. So that was that side. In Nationwide, we are fortunate enough, but in this case, fortunate enough to be the #1 powered access training company in the UK. That just meant we're harder than anyone else. So we've been very focused on bringing that revenue stream back into the organisation. And it is coming back. Those guys who had cards expired are desperate to get the cards renewed. It's possible as well that they're not fully employed by their employer, but you can undertake training. So they probably want to get those renewed right now. In terms of digitisation, Loxham as a group, which was Nationwide apart since 2017, started its digitalisation project for the group in 2017, with France being the leading country out of the 20+ countries in which we operate. And that has served us well going into the pandemic, in that we already had telecommunications and in the main digital technology to enable virtually everyone to work from home. We did need to go out by 100 or so devices to fully enable Nationwide platforms, and there was a few people who didn't have phones that desperately needed mobile phones. But again, with the advance notice out of Italy and out of France, we're able to get ahead of the ordering surge that made it difficult to get hold of these devices. For me, I think it's probably crystallized the thinking on the need for office space, the need for working in the more traditional ways. And those that might have thought if you're working from home, you're only doing half a day or you're breaking off or whatever, their mind, their thought process has changed, because you can be just as productive with technology like we're using now, with the virtual meetings and so on. And I think this is going to lead to a sea change in thought processing. I would hate to have a portfolio of offices right now. And probably the only thing one worse than that is if you've got retail and offices in your portfolio, because I think that side of the demand is going to take a knock. But it can be done. It has been done. It can be as efficient and on certain occasions more efficient to operate from home. And I think businesses will, first of all, get through this, recognise if there's any second wave, and then start putting measures in place for long-term change.
Okay, brilliant, and good to hear. Andy, so we were talking about obviously just I think so the digitalisation and the infotech, telematics. Is that going to play a big part for yourselves?
Andy Wright, you mean Brian? Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. I'll get. Oh, Andrew. Yeah. Sorry, Andrew.
I didn't know if Brian was, if the other Andy was back on or not. So, okay. Well, firstly, I'm hoping the new normal doesn't include the COVID haircut that I'm currently sporting. So I'm hoping there's going to be some light at the end of that particular tunnel soon. Look, as I said, we're going to have to live with the virus, so we have to find ways of working with it. And I think we've all realised that working from home or remotely from the office is actually possible now. And technology has advanced tremendously. You know, whether you're using Teams or Zoom like we are on this particular call, Skype or WebEx or whatever it is, and I'm using all at the moment, we've been able to continue to do our work. And in many, many cases, if not all cases, I think we're all realising we're actually more productive at time when we do that, because we're not spending all that time in our car every day. So when the virus struck, you know, we went into our remote working mode, a bit like Brian explained. It was a really good test for our disaster recovery plan, actually, and it worked really well. And since then, subsequently to that, we've been surveying our teams who are working remotely and asking them, you know, how they feel about it. And I think probably about half of them have said it's great and would really like to continue like that. Whereas the other half have, and probably because they don't have a dedicated space where they can work, they may be working at a kitchen table, or they've got kids running around in the house, or, you know, I think they've said, well, it's not so good for me. So I think we're going to find something that's kind of a hybrid of the two, probably, and we're going to end up in a situation where there'll be a much more flexible working pattern for people, sometimes in office, sometimes at home. I think what is important is human interaction is still really, really important in terms of building teams and building motivation. And so I think we still need to provide areas where people can come together in person rather than virtually to interact. That's quite important going forward. I think it also applies to sales teams, frankly. You know, our sales teams who are all back are saying, you know, actually I'm getting a lot more done over video conferencing. I can get to see customers eat more easily because they can allocate some time. I don't have to drive hundreds of miles between each appointment. You know, so I'm getting actually there's kind of more work taking place. So I think sales teams and customers now, in fact, they only want you on their sites if there's something very, very specific that they need you to look at, and your expertise is required. They don't want people just calling in to say hello and have a coffee. You know, those days for now anyway have certainly gone. So I think you will find that not just in terms of administration tasks will potentially roll forward into some of our sales teams and how they work and operate going forward. I think the other thing that strikes me is that whole area of digitalization and e-commerce, which is an area that we all, you know, in our private lives, we all use regularly. I think my wife uses it every day, actually, and she's single-handedly trying to keep the economy afloat at the moment. I think like, the money she's spending. But I think digitization, e-commerce, has not really taken root in the construction sector, and certainly not in the rental sector. Not to any great degree. It's there, but it's kind of in the background. I think this is going to change that. I think that we're going to see, you know, people don't want to be visited. They want to be able to remotely order equipment. They want it to be easier to do that. Maybe if teams are smaller because their people have been made redundant or whatever, then I think you could find that the e-commerce is an area that gets prioritized now going forward by customers, and that might be a fundamental shift. I mean, you know, the world's changed. It's likely to have changed for good in some ways. That said, you know, we're a resilient bunch here in the UK, aren't we? And old habits do die hard for us. And so I think that don't be surprised if ultimately we end up with a new normal that's somewhere between the old normal and today's new normal, which is probably two extremes. Somewhere in the middle probably is where we'll end up landing, I think.
Yeah, and that's really, really good. And let's all hope that they take the same view about paying their bills, Andy. Maybe they'll pay them online quickly. Exactly, but we could all wish for that one. Welcome back, Andy. Sorry we lost you there. No worries. Always just a very quick one because time's flashing by us here. Is we were just on about digitalisation, telematics, which is probably prominent to your industry on earth moving equipment. I'm talking about how do we go forward? Do you think this is going to take or influence your way forward?
Yeah, definitely. We during the lockdown period, we've continued to first and foremost invest in our telematics and our machine control equipment, because it's the way forward. No two ways about that. So what we've also done is we've been providing data analysis to our clients for some time now, and part of that is because we can make sites safer, because they're going to use less machines, because the machines they're going to have are going to be more efficient, less idle times, less times where the machine is just using too much fuel just by just sitting around, or overrunning. So it won't only support efficiencies, but it'll also mean that our customers will need less machines, making sites safer, and everyone, in addition, to make projects more cost effective by reducing carbon emissions, because we'll be delivering less and collecting less. So, and that data is being used by a large volume of our customers already. So we have somebody in place at the moment that does a lot of this information data gathering and putting it to our clients. But that's going to very quickly become automated, so that people can get these reports, and they're going to be instantaneous. They're not going to be slow or difficult to read. It's going to be very quick, very smooth, and very slick to make sites more effective and more efficient. So, and we are absolutely leading the way in that, because we know that's the future.
Okay, that's absolutely brilliant. I'm not quite sure. We've got about 6 or 7 minutes now. Have we got any questions that has actually come in, Kevin?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Yes, we have had quite a few questions come in. David Chuck, Aaron Westby, Alan Guthrie have all answered questions. I think we're not going to be able to go through all of them, but one particular one has come in, which I think is going to be quite an interesting one to ask. Has anything positive come out of the coronavirus pandemic? And if so, what is that positive thing? What is the most positive thing? I'd be interested to hear the panelists' views on that. Andy, may I ask, Andy Wright, would you go first, please?
Yeah, well, I mean, I can give you an example, but it's a very specific example to Sunbelt Rentals. So, I'm not saying it's positive for the rest of the world, but it is positive for us. So obviously we went through our rebranding process. We launched our new strategy and plan on the 4th of March in Manchester. 23rd of March, the country locked down, and I think, I said to Brian earlier, I thought, well, that was money well spent, wasn't it? Going through a big conference, 800 people there, and then suddenly the country's in lockdown. But the whole point of our rebranding is around what we've called Project Unify, which is the bringing together of all our various businesses. With 23 different operating brands in the business, which now all operate under Sunbelt Rentals with each of their specialisms. And the NHS test site project that we got involved in, which meant that a number of our businesses all had to operate as one in terms of installing, drive-throughs, anything between a 7-lane to a 17-lane drive-throughs, usually within about a 12-hour period, meant that it brought our whole business together, working together as one to achieve that. So actually, the crisis caused a situation where all the objectives of Project Unify suddenly came to life through the NHS test centres. So in that sense, it's helped our rebranding process, because as we said, we all know how difficult that can be. And has brought the business much closer together than it was previously. So for us personally, as Sunbelt Rentals, that has been a positive that's come out of the crisis.
Very, very good, very interesting. Thanks, Andy. Brian, anything positive from your perspective?
Absolutely. People. A bit like Andy, we had some essential projects that forced people to come together and really drive the passion in helping their country get to the point where something was achieved. With people, I'd include a step change in wellness. We already had wellness mechanisms in our organisations, contracts, activities, etc. But I think the construction industry is sometimes a little bit, shall we say, reticent to encompass these concepts. But the situation we found ourselves in drove us forward to do a step change in that wellness program in terms of the communications, the relationship, dare I even say happiness or fun in the workplace or not in the workplace, depending where you were, and a recognition that it's not about just driving absolute efficiency out of everyone. It's about managing that balance in their mental state and putting more in there. And I think we've done that extremely well, and we are resolved to continue that pace of change going forward. So I think the people, the relationships, the desire to stay connected and to interact by whatever mechanism was necessary has been a huge step, along with the absolute determination to accelerate the digitalization, Internet of Things, e-commerce, etc., as a way of moving the organization. So it's been a real push behind the organization. You could say we're going down that track, but there's needed to be an acceleration in those two key areas.
Very good. Thanks, Brian. Andy, anything positive from your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I've got a couple. So we've been very positively happy about the fact that infrastructure continued. That really helped us through where we were and how we were going to manage through it from a financial perspective. But we also have to talk about how we had to adapt. You know, our people are, and one of the things that CPA talked about not long ago was resilience. I'm going to echo what Andy said. People are resilient, and not only are they resilient, but they were able to adapt very, very quickly. And surprisingly, because it's quite difficult to go from working at your office, at your desk with your colleagues, to suddenly working at home with all the distractions that are there. We also did silly things like competitions with our people, because it was all about well-being. So we would have silly competitions on Zoom or one of the other social media platforms to try and keep people focused and keep them happy and let them know that we cared about them. So I think from a positive point of view, I've actually think some of the relationships, although became distant, became closer in a weird way.
Thanks, Andy. I often muse on why humans are the most successful species on the planet, and I think one of the reasons behind that is because human beings are naturally adaptable, and under difficult circumstances such as what we've faced, we actually get down to it and work much closer together and adapt to our circumstances and make the best of it. And we've certainly seen some good examples of that, both from corporations, from leaders, and from individuals over the last few months. So we're just coming up to 11 o'clock now, so I will draw the webinar to a close. But before doing so, I'll just hand back to Brian Jones. Brian, any final words from you, please?
Thank you, Kevin. If I could just obviously give my sincere thanks to you guys. You've given us your time today. For me personally, fantastic, great insight. Thank you ever so much for your support, not just for me, but for CPA. We have got 1,700 members now, in excess of 1,700 members. I'm sure that each and every one of them has taken some great stuff from you guys. It's good to know that our largest companies in the UK and in Europe are, and especially yourself, Andy, being the second in the world. You've got Nationwide, Loxham out there, Lynch, big players over here in the UK. I'm sure that the experience that you've given them today is valuable, and I'm sure for your own staff, so much, I'm not going to use the word comfort again, Brian, but some real confidence in what you guys are doing on their behalf. So for me personally, a very big thank you. Thanks for taking the time out. Thanks for taking the invitation. And I certainly look forward to doing a bit of this with you soon, or whatever we're going to do. But I'll hand you back to Kevin to finish, and a big thank you from me.
Thank you very much, Brian. And I can only reiterate and echo all of those sentiments that you have just made. So we draw to a close. Andy Wright, Brian Stead, Andy Burrows, Brian Jones, thank you all for your participation. Thank you everybody for attending. The webinar is now closed. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.